Let's set the scene. It's the year 1862. You're riding a creaky wagon into the great American frontier, dreaming of open skies, fertile land, and maybe a wife who doesn't share your last name. Unfortunately, that last one's a tall order. Because in the Wild West, the dating pool wasn't so much a pool, as it was a very shallow puddle. And odds are, if you tossed a stone into it, you'd hit your own cousin. Inbreeding in the Old West wasn't just a creepy backwoods stereotype, it was a logistical outcome. The combination of sparse settlements, tight-knit religious communities, and a social structure held together by shotgun weddings and family Bibles meant that plenty of Americans were tying the knot without ever really leaving the family tree. Now, before you judge those dusty old pioneers too harshly, let's remember one thing. They didn't exactly have Tinder, or cars, or roads, or people, really. And in a world where the nearest neighbor lived 6 miles away and was probably your uncle, love had a way of circling right back to the family farm. So, grab a mug of questionable whiskey and settle in. We're about to dig into the tangled, occasionally tragic, and sometimes just plain blue-blooded world of Wild West inbreeding. Yes, blue, that's not a metaphor. We'll get there. Why inbreeding made sense. The American frontier was vast, unforgiving, and sparsely populated. The perfect setting for, well, accidental incest. Let's say you're a God-fearing settler in rural Wyoming. You've got a plot of land, a shed full of turnips, and 12 kids. There's another family 10 miles down the dirt track. But your horse died last week, and the next Sunday, social is 3 months away. What do you do when your children reach marrying age? Simple. You marry them off to each other. Now, not every case was so direct, but cousin marriages were far from rare, especially in religious or cultural communities that emphasized family loyalty, land retention, or, let's be honest, convenience. In many parts of the country, marrying your first cousin wasn't considered unusual. It was downright practical. This was especially true in communities that valued insularity. Mennonites, some German-speaking settlers, and of course, Mormon pioneers, all participated in what might generously be called close-knit marital patterns. These weren't back-alley elopements either. They were sanctified by church records, approved by elders, and printed proudly in local newspapers. Add to that the fact that the federal government wasn't exactly micromanaging prairie weddings in the year 1870. And you've got a recipe for generations of genetically intimate families. But don't take our word for it. Let's meet the poster children, literally, of what happens when your great-grandparents were also your great-aunt and uncle. Blue people and blue blood. The Fugates of Kentucky. Okay, technically, the Fugates didn't live in the Wild West. They lived in the Appalachian hollers of eastern Kentucky. But their story is so jaw-dropping, it deserves a place in every conversation about frontier inbreeding. Meet Martin Fugate, a French orphan who settled in Troublesome Creek around the year 1820. He married a woman named Elizabeth Smith, who, by random genetic luck, or cosmic mischief, carried a rare recessive gene that causes methemoglobinemia. That's a condition that makes your blood bad at carrying oxygen. The result? Your skin turns blue. No, really, not metaphorically blue like noble blood. We're talking actual Smurf-colored humans. Now here's the kicker. The only way this condition gets passed on is if both parents carry the gene, which, thanks to generations of cousin marriages, happened a lot in the Fugate family. Over time, entire branches of their descendants, brothers, sisters, cousins, and more cousins, started being born with blue-tinted skin. They weren't sick. They weren't gasping for air. They were just blue. Local doctors were baffled. Some thought it was a skin condition. Others blamed it on dirty well water. It wasn't until the 1960s that hematologist Dr. Madison Coween figured it out. It was inbreeding, pure and simple, not from malice or deviance, but from isolation. The Fugates hadn't seen an outsider gene in over a century. Now you may say, that's Appalachia, not Arizona. True, but the principles were the same. A small, tight-knit community, very few outsiders, and a tendency to marry the cousin you already knew, instead of riding 3 towns over to find a stranger. So yes, the blue people lived in Kentucky, but if the few Gates had packed up their wagons and headed west, half of Nevada might have ended up looking like a bruise. Cousins, prophets, and plural wives. Let's talk about Utah, or, as it might have been called back then, the holy land of family reunions that never end. When Brigham Young led the Mormon pioneers westward into the Great Basin in the year 1847, they weren't just seeking religious freedom and spiritual purity. They were also, perhaps unknowingly, laying the groundwork for one of the most genetically closed societies in American history. The early members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints weren't just building temples, they were building dynasties. Family connections were spiritual currency. Marrying with entrusted bloodlines helped consolidate power, wealth, and influence across generations. And if your cousin was pious, hardworking, and within walking distance, all the better. It wasn't just about polygamy, though that certainly helped accelerate things. The real magic formula was the combination of isolation, theology, and tight social control. Leaders of the early LDS Church not only allowed first cousin marriages, they often encouraged them. It was considered a way to strengthen the spiritual lineage and preserve the moral fiber of the community. You weren't just marrying a cousin, you were safeguarding your salvation. And honestly, what were your other options when the nearest non-relative lived 100 miles away by ox cart, and you already had 2 wives and a dozen kids to feed? Taking the shortcut and marrying someone you already saw at Sunday dinner seemed downright efficient. Your cousin knew your favorite hymn, your preferred soup temperature, and how to churn butter without making it weird. Compatibility wasn't in question. Genetics, barely a footnote. One church historian noted that in certain Utah settlements during the mid-19th century, entire towns had 70% of residents sharing fewer than 5 surnames. That wasn't considered a scandal. It was a manageable headcount for church potlucks. The settlements functioned almost like medieval fiefdoms. Clans marrying clans, trading land, sealing alliances with blessings and bloodlines. You could go from cradle to altar without ever leaving the family circle. And while it may sound dystopian now, back then it was simply the logistics of holiness. To be clear, the modern LDS Church has long since abandoned these practices. Polygamy was officially renounced in 1890, and marrying your cousin is now strongly discouraged, legally and doctrinally. But the cultural and genetic legacy lingers, particularly in offshoot communities that held fast to the old ways long after the official church moved on. Want proof? Just ask the folks down in Colorado City, where the 19th century theology of marry within never quite got the 20th century memo. The Jessups, the Barlows, and the chromosome rodeo welcome to Colorado City, Arizona, formerly known as Short Creek, and unofficially known as the town where family lines looped back on themselves more than once. Not because it's messy and wild, but because it rolls in a circle, picks up dust, and eventually collapses under its own structure. This dusty little outpost on the Arizona-Utah border is the ancestral home of several massive polygamist clans: the Jessups, the Barlows, the Johnson family, and a few others, whose last names were passed down with the same frequency as recessive genes. Most of them trace their roots back to the original Mormon pioneers of the 1800s, men who settled the land, built temples, and married more wives than most people own socks. These families later broke away from the mainstream LDS Church after it officially renounced polygamy in 1890. That didn't sit well with the true believers. So they went rogue and formed what would eventually become the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a group that embraced plural marriage, total theocratic control, and apparently a total disregard for the principles of genetic diversity. By the early 2000s, medical researchers began noticing something strange, even by Short Creek standards. An unusually high number of children in the community were diagnosed with fumarase deficiency, a rare inherited condition that leads to serious neurological and physical impairments. In the general population, the disease is so rare it barely registers. In Colorado City, it was showing up with shocking regularity, enough to raise red flags, then red sirens. The reason? Generations upon generations of cousin marriages among just a few dozen founding families. Think of it like stacking a deck of cards, shuffling it 3 times, then drawing from the same pile for 150 years. Over time, those rare, recessive mutations, which would normally vanish harmlessly, started matching up. Some reports estimate that up to 75% of the town's population shares the same 2 or 3 great-grandparents. At that point, you're no longer building a community. You're recreating a single genome in bulk. But despite the obvious consequences, it wasn't seen as wrong. In fact, it was seen as righteous. Marrying within the faith and within the family was encouraged, even celebrated. Outsiders were viewed as corrupting influences. And apostates who fled the town were often shunned, disowned, or worse. The entire social structure revolved around obedience, bloodline loyalty, and the word of the prophet. One of those prophets, Warren Jeffs, led the FLDS with near total control and arranged numerous controversial marriages, often involving very young brides and significantly older men, a practice that later drew intense legal scrutiny. Love didn't enter into it, choice didn't either. The goal was to preserve the pure bloodlines of the faithful, which, by then, had levels of genetic variation that were dangerously low. Over time, the isolated settlement evolved into a closed community, where religious doctrine guided family structures and intermarriage among relatives became a normalized practice. And when the DNA dust settled, the results weren't just tragic. They were preventable. Still, for many in Colorado City, the message remained clear. Obedience was more important than chromosomes, and as long as the bloodline stayed holy, no one seemed to care how many loops it made to get there, or, depending on your perspective, how thoroughly it had been marinated. The LeBaron Saga. If you think Colorado City was bad, let us introduce you to the LeBarons of Mexico, because nothing says spiritual enlightenment like inbreeding and organized homicide. The LeBaron family began as an offshoot of polygamous Mormonism in the early 20th century. Alma Dayer LeBaron Sr., a devout fundamentalist, moved his massive family to Chihuahua, Mexico, to escape U.S. anti-polygamy laws. There, he founded a colony and passed his beliefs on to his many sons, who passed them on to their many cousins, who passed them on to, well, mostly each other. The family eventually split into factions. One branch formed the Church of the Firstborn of the Fullness of Times, which sounds impressive, until you realize it functioned more like a tightly controlled web of interrelated marriages and communal labor. The most infamous son, Ervil LeBaron, believed he was a prophet and carried out a violent campaign known as blood atonement, targeting those, even within his family, who challenged his authority. And those family members? You guessed it. Often cousins, half-brothers, or nephews. The LeBaron genetic pool wasn't just small. It remained tightly contained over multiple generations. With over 100 children, born to just a handful of men and dozens of interrelated wives, the family became a living example of closed-loop reproduction. Medical records are scarce, but accounts from former members point to increased instances of developmental challenges and psychological hardship. And yet, the cycle continued. Even today, breakaway LeBaron communities persist in northern Mexico and parts of the American Southwest, still clinging to the doctrine that a little marrying within the family was seen by some as a necessary step on the path to spiritual salvation. Kit Carson's not-so-distant wife. Let's shift away from the cults and chaos and look at one of the more respectable figures of the Old West, Kit Carson, legendary frontiersman, trapper, scout, and accidental participant in cousin-level matrimony. Carson's third wife, Josefa Jaramillo, was related, albeit distantly, to one of his earlier romantic partners. Some genealogists even argue that she was a cousin of his first wife. Now, this wasn't a case of first cousin marriage like in the polygamist compounds, but it still illustrates how limited the social options were in frontier settlements. Taos, New Mexico, where Carson lived, wasn't exactly a bustling metropolis in the 1840s. The pool of eligible women was tiny, and many of them came from the same Spanish-Mexican families that had intermarried for generations. In other words, even American heroes weren't immune to the family loop. You couldn't blame them. Travel was slow, matches were practical, and if the family name was already carved into your rifle, it probably made sense to marry someone who knew how to pronounce it. Church registers and cousin clusters. Let's say you're in Missouri in the 1870s, and you want to get married. You head to the local Baptist church, flip open the family Bible, and lo and behold, the woman you've been courting shares your last name. Not just a coincidence. She's your first cousin. Do you call it off? Of course not. You invite Uncle Pastor to officiate and hope Grandma doesn't say anything awkward during the reception. Church records from rural Missouri, Arkansas, and Utah show countless examples of first and second cousin marriages. These weren't hidden in shame. They were recorded openly in church ledgers, with the same family names appearing over and over again. In some towns, if you weren't a Henson, you were a Duval. And if you weren't a Duval, you were marrying one. Let's take an actual entry from a Missouri church registry in the year 1879. Sarah Henson married John Henson. Her mother's maiden name? Henson. His father's brother, also Sarah's uncle. Do the math. Don't stay too long in that part of the tree. This pattern wasn't unique. In many frontier towns, the population might consist of 10 to 15 extended families who had intermarried since the founding of the settlement. With little outside migration, the only way to expand the community was to double down on the existing bloodlines. Even in larger towns like Provo, Utah, early genealogical studies show family names interlocking like Lego bricks. In some cases, settlers married a cousin from back east to maintain pure lineage, or because their parents arranged it to keep land in the family. It wasn't scandalous. It was efficient. Fumarase deficiency and frontier medicine. You might be wondering, what happens when this goes on for too long? What are the real-world effects of generations of cousin marriage, especially in closed communities? Fumarase deficiency. It's not a household name, but in parts of Colorado City, it's a grim reality. Caused by a recessive gene mutation, fumarase deficiency results in severe developmental delays, physical malformations, seizures, and an inability to speak or walk. Worldwide, it's extremely rare, but in one FLDS community, it's practically a known condition. In the early 2000s, doctors began studying the town's unusually high rates of the disorder. What they found was shocking. The majority of diagnosed children shared the same great-great-grandparents. Often, the same family lines had intermarried 3 or 4 times over just a few generations. That's not a family tree. That's a genetic Jenga tower. But in the Old West, no one was diagnosing fumarase deficiency. Without access to doctors, much less geneticists, communities often chalked these conditions up to fate. Families would care for affected children quietly, or not at all. There are disturbing accounts of children hidden from view or institutionalized in far-off cities once the condition became unmanageable. And yet, the pattern continued. Because once you're deep into cousin territory, it's not easy to get out, especially when the community doesn't want outsiders and views deviation as a spiritual threat. That's how genetics and theology make a very toxic cocktail. So, what have we learned? Well, first, that the romantic image of the rugged frontiersman might be missing a few details, like the fact that his wife might also be his niece, or that the entire town he built was genetically indistinguishable from a single family reunion. Second, that inbreeding in the Wild West wasn't a joke or a punchline. It was a structural reality, shaped by geography, religion, social pressure, and survival. And while most of these communities didn't see themselves as inbreeding, they absolutely were. Now, in fairness, Not everyone in the Old West was marrying their cousin. In cities, ports, and boomtowns, there was far more diversity.